Hey, welcome to the 1138 podcast, a podcast where I interview people I know who have lived great lives for God. My hope is to encourage you to go forward in the name of Jesus with your life. The world is not worthy of my guests, and I hope you're encouraged as you listen. My name is Rudy, and thanks for catching up with me. Hey, I really appreciate you checking in today. If you're a subscriber, you might have been wondering what happened because I haven't posted a new interview in over 3 months. And the answer is a lot of life happened. First, the end of 2019 and the holidays, and then some really difficult ministry work that I've needed to attend to. And then here we are in early April, and we all know what happened in March to the world, COVID-19. And it was actually COVID that allowed me to refocus and get back into the podcast game. I've been wanting to do this for months. I've been seeking out friends to interview, and I've had a lot of interest. I've got a long list of people I intend to interview, but getting the timing right is the challenge. And so, as you know, I'm trying to put out one interview per month. I'm obviously a little behind on that, but I've been working at it, and I did find a few friends that have told me recently they'd be willing, and it seems like life has given them a chance to get on the podcast. And so here we are, taking a break from work and other things in order to bring you this interview. Now, I do think with COVID-19, I've just been wondering if this podcast is really something that we all could use. And I say that humbly just because my dad always told me, go forward in the name of Jesus. And, you know, as Christians, we're trying to do that. And COVID-19 in many ways is very challenging to that, correct? So I hope this podcast really does encourage you. So today's interview is with my good friend, Russell Dietrich. He lives in Urbana, Illinois. He's a campus minister with the same ministry that I'm a part of. Though he works at the University of Illinois, and you'll hear that in the interview. He's an avid Illini fan. He's a friend I met through our son-in-law, I think about 10 years ago. And Russ is a great guy. He's a young, sharp, creative leader, and I think you'll really enjoy my time with Russ. Okay, have a listen. Well,
All
hey,
right.
Russ. Hey, Russ, thanks for being on my podcast, the 11:30 podcast. Yeah, it's so exciting to start this up again. I've taken a little break here in 2020. We had a rough start personally to the year, and maybe we'll get into that today some, but you know, after a couple of months, we got a chance to connect on a project I'm working on, and then you said yes to the podcast. So I just want to tell you thanks.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Where should I be looking? Do I look at the camera or do I look at you?
You can look either way. That's probably a little better. You can look straight on.
All right, I'll look here. Is that good?
Great. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I could tell you, since I've known you, you're exhibiting this quality right now, but just this funny, lover of life, witty, creative, thoughtful. I mean, you've got all these great qualities, and obviously we were introduced through Brett, our mutual friend Brett. I don't remember exactly how we met. I do remember, I think it was over Epic Duels. I want to say it was my house in Illinois. I can't quite remember, but tell us a little bit about yourself. But before you do that, let me just tell you, I really think when Hebrews 11:38 says the world was not worthy of all these unnamed saints and believers, I think the world's not worthy of you, Russ.
Oh, thanks, Rudy.
And I want to know, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell me what you think of that.
Well, just to clarify, we did meet over a game of Epic Duels, and I remember it being like, now, for those listening, you should Google this game. It's probably one of the best board games ever made. It's out of print. But there was like an epic duel going on between a really weak character, like a Greedo type, and a really strong character, like Darth Vader. And it just kept going and going, and everyone was getting more ridiculous. And yeah, I'm almost positive that was the first time we ever hung out. And then our friendship has just kind of slowly grown over the years.
Yeah.
So you want to know a little about me?
Yeah. Tell us what you're doing. And since we've met, a lot of life has happened. we've known each other for a while now, but I'd love to hear, what have you been up to? What's going on in your life?
Well, I was born on a hot summer day in July 1987, and I was a happy baby, quiet, content in all my ways, never cried. No, I'm kidding. Rudy, that's a lot of time. That's like 33 years. What part do you want to know about?
Since we met, like what's been the last 6 years of your life? What have you been doing? What do you do for a living? Where do you live? What gets you up in the
Well,
morning?
past 6 years, and she doesn't get me up in the morning, but I've been married now for almost 5 years. She wakes up
Hey,
before me, but never wakes me up. So that's not very helpful. But her name's Megan. We met at the University of Illinois. I was out of college already, and she came here for grad school. So we're about a year apart in age. And we met in our mid-20s and fell in love and got married. And that's been honestly probably the biggest and best part of my past 5 years. As you know, but the listeners might not know, you and I work in the same field. We're both campus missionaries. So you work at a lesser school, Colorado State. I work
sure.
at what they call a public Ivy, the Ivy of the Midwest, the Harvard of Illinois, the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. My alma mater. I went to school there. I got 2 degrees. Big Illini fan. I always joke I could work in the office of admissions if I wasn't doing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm a campus missionary and trying to reach college students in the name of Christ and hopefully help raise up the next generation of leaders like our friend Brett, who I think is what I think of when I think of like why I do ministry. I always think of him and Katie and their family.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys the same age?
Oh no, young Brett is a little bit younger than me. He was my Padawan to go with the Star Wars theme.
Okay.
I was his Obi-Wan, and he was a rebellious Anakin Skywalker.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I can't ever keep up with aging, even my own. So
we're honestly like, I think he's 2 years younger than me, so it's not much.
Okay. Kind of running mates, but a little bit older.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what you've been doing this for a while, the campus ministry work and gospel work with college students. What is it that keeps you in that field? Like what are you passionate about with working with young people? What do you see there in your own life?
I think honestly, it's alumni that keep me going. So when you're doing ministry, for people that do ministry, you know, like a big question you ask is like, what am I doing with my life? Like, why did I start doing this? Am I making a difference? Does this really matter? And I'm always grateful when I get to reconnect with alumni that have graduated and just hear about how they're doing and the successes they've had. And what really motivates me is when people get plugged into churches and then start leading themselves. So then that motivates me to go work with the freshmen and the sophomores that are like, their heads are in the sky and they're like, what's going on, dude? I have this picture of what they can become in my head that really helps motivate me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So would you say, kind of in that, with that last part of it there, do you look for the potential in people? Is that kind of one of your things?
I don't like pick and choose like this person has more potential. I try to have an open heart to anybody, if that makes sense. Because, you know, I think like you can fall into a trap of thinking you're like a baseball scout and be like, oh yeah, this kid's got good stuff. But I found out very quick, whenever I did that, I was always really wrong. And it's usually the people that you don't expect that end up rising up as leaders. So I try to remain really open-handed and not, especially with freshmen, it's so easy to caricature them and be like, you just got to remain open-minded and kind of let people develop, and it usually reveals itself, if that makes sense, by like junior year. So, what was the question? Sorry.
Well, yeah. Do you see the potential in people? Is that what you're looking for? And I hear you saying you're not being selective. You're not trying to pre-choose someone's destiny, if you will. Not that you can even do that, but from your perspective, from the minister's perspective, you're not looking at the field and going, man, I need a shortstop, so he's got to have strong arm and quick feet. You're going, hey, anybody can play. We'll see what happens over time.
Yeah,
let people
and
develop.
I think of potential as a this is naive, but I have to believe that everyone has potential.
Yeah.
Because if you don't believe that, then you're going to start picking and choosing people. And I just don't personally want to do that. I think it's wrong. So.
Oh, dig into that a little bit. Why is that wrong? I agree with you, but I'm curious what you'd have to say with that.
Hold on a sec. I need to open my door real quick. I'm worried about the echo. Sorry. It helps with the sound waves.
Yeah.
Well, people listening are Christians usually, or for the audience? Okay.
Yeah,
so,
so.
The Apostle Paul, bald, short, and unattractive as far as we can tell, right? He did not look like what you see in a mega church up on stage. He didn't have cool jeans. He didn't have a cool haircut. From the epistles, we kind of get the impression he was kind of hard to be around, you know? And I think if you start to say this person has potential and this person doesn't, usually we're doing that based off of appearance and extroversion. Does that make sense? So we tend to be drawn to the extroverted and attractive people. You know, there's that big thing in the 90s, attractional ministry. Well, what's that word come from? It comes from attractive. And a lot of times the great leaders in the scriptures, at least, aren't very attractive people, physically and emotionally, I'd say. So I think my default mode has to be everyone has potential, because I don't want to be limited by my biases and by my proclivities, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I want to be open to being surprised and being like, I love when I can be like, I never saw that coming. That's totally just God. And honestly, Rudy, I've just been wrong a lot. So I've kind of given up on trying. I would have been a horrible scout if I did go into the sports world. So it's a lesson I had to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. There's a line in a Bob Dylan song. I don't remember which one it is. Forgive me on that. But he says, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. And that's kind of the hook line at the end of the stanzas. And I always like that line because I think his reality there, or that he's speaking about, is the older you get, it seems like you realize you don't know as much, and maybe when you're younger, you think you do have all the answers, and you turn out you're usually wrong.
There's a Wes Anderson movie. It's an older one called Rushmore, and there's a song where the lyric is, "I wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger." Sorry, I sang that. But
yeah, no, it's okay.
I wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger.
Yeah.
And that's like, truer words haven't been spoken. So.
Okay, so I heard this the other day. I heard this this leader talking to other leaders saying that very thought, was the premise of the blog post. And then he said, so here's my attempt at helping you younger leaders learn more than in one sense you ought from my own mistakes and follies, right? And so I kind of, the older generation tends to do that. So what's the role of that kind of thinking when it seems to me, I guess this is I'm setting it up, but this is what it seems to me how life tends to work is we tend to think we know, and then over time we realize we don't know as much. And so then we look back to the next generation and say, let me help you learn so that you don't have to make the same types of mistakes as me. But if the first premise holds true, then are we not just all shifting 10 years down the line? So is it what's the role of the older person going, 2 years, 10 years, well, however long difference the age is, you to Brett, me to you, or whatever, where we go, hey, give you some thoughts here. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that? Does that make sense? Are you making sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And I think, I think like ministry, there's probably a lot of parallels to parenting. I'd imagine, not a parent yet, so I don't know, but here's what I think. So I'm kind of working from the symptom and moving backwards. So at least with Gen Z and millennials, there's a real fear of failure, and there's a kind of choice paralysis that a lot of us, I think, struggle with. And as I've reflected on that, I think a lot of it comes from that. We've been given so much advice from our parent figures, whoever they are, whether it's biological or over YouTube, that we have all this input, and there's just this fear of messing up or doing the wrong thing. So I've thought about that a lot, and I've thought, well, maybe it's not about giving the perfect advice. Maybe it's about showing them that you'll be steadfast by their side as they go through the process of learning. Because I think what that phrase, I don't want you to make the same mistakes I made, you're robbing them of something in that, that you got to experience. You're robbing them of learning in a lot of ways. Because I think ultimately we're trying to spare people from pain. And I think that's where we make the biggest mistake is we can't be motivated by wanting to protect people from pain, because that's how you learn. But that's how we've been raised, if that makes sense. We've been raised in a bubble. We've been coddled because our parents didn't want us to feel pain. But the absence of pain is the absence of learning, I think, in a lot of ways, and growing. Like your muscles are like that. If you don't put them through the ringer, they'll never grow,
That's an interesting thought.
It's well-intentioned, but I think like it ends up hurting the development of people. So my big thing is whenever I give advice, I say, Joe, I'm giving you this advice. If you choose to ignore it, I will still be your friend. I will still be by your side. And my friendship is not contingent on you taking this advice. I think a lot of Christians say, listen to me, and if you don't, you're out. And that's just not, I don't think that hasn't seemed productive to me.
See, I tend to agree with you. I think this is what I would add, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Help shape this thought. But the if it's true that generally speaking, pain is the way we learn, and so the older generation, with good intentions, trying to spare the younger generation from those pain points, gives advice. To me, if the younger generation takes the advice word for word, action for action, life is so complex and still yet kind of infinite that it does not still spare the pain. So you might miss the broken bone off a skateboard like me, but I break my bone on the bike instead. Right. Because it's just how it is, unless you just don't live, and then there's no growth, as you said. So there's no pain, there's no growth. So Anyhow, that's my thought. So it's okay to give advice in one sense, and even give it free-handedly, like you said, or open-handedly. But even so, the goal can't be you won't experience pain because hey, I can spare you some. I can get you ahead. Like it's like investment, right? Hey, if you invest here at this point, you can incrementally make money, exponentially make money. You may miss that, you may not, but you may make money there, but you might miss money somewhere else because it's just complex and it's challenging, and life is like that. Anyhow, that's my addition to your thought.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
And I think like instead of if you're a mentor, if you're a parent, if you're a guardian, you know, like I think it should be more about don't try to protect people from pain, like try to protect people from folly, if that makes sense. Like, and that's where I think like with younger people, that's where we can be a little more proactive in terms of like, I don't know if that's the word that just came to my mind, folly. It's such an old timey word. But,
no, it's a great word. It's a good biblical word.
If that makes sense, I think that's where, especially with young men, I think like that's where I want to try to be a little more. But there's a lot of guys that I think just need to take a risk, and I'm happy to push them to take risks and then be like, if you fall on your face, I'll be here to talk about it. You know, like you won't be alone in your pain, but I'm not going to try to protect you from pain.
That's good. That's really good.
Amen,
so,
brother.
Speaking of pain, right? So we're in COVID-19.
Everyone can see me scratching my nose. I keep forgetting.
I know. Yeah. Don't go further.
You're really good. That. You're like not touching your face at all.
Yeah, don't go further than that.
I'm like the picture of what not to do in this time of quarantine.
That's your own life. I mean, you know, don't go around spreading that.
My sister, we bite our nails and we're face touchers, and she's like, Russ, this is not a good time to be face touchers. We need to stop.
Is she older than you?
Oh yeah.
That sounds like an older.
3.5 years.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So where I was going with that question, COVID-19, quarantine, self-isolation, you know, social distancing. These are terms I'd never heard. Are these new terms? You're the guy that's up to date on those types of things. But here's my question. How are you doing physically, spiritually, emotionally in this season of pain for the world?
Well, I feel bad because I know like there's especially doctors, and I have a friend who is a paramedic, and police officers and firefighters, and like grocery store clerks. Like a lot of these people are having to put their life on the line. So it feels weird to say that like the quarantine for me has actually been good, because I know it's been so bad for other people, but just purely subjectively, it's been interesting how beneficial it's been, I guess, for me. But let me explain why.
Yeah.
One is for my marriage, like my wife and I both, our jobs kept us apart a lot of the week, you know? So we've been able to spend a lot more quality time together. So one bit of advice I got from a missionary who was working overseas and kind of got to experience this a few months beforehand was they said to go on daily walks, you know, while socially distancing. So I've been walking every day with Megan, and every time we go for a walk, we just have a really good conversation. Wasn't like that before quarantine. And since we're both working at home, we just see each other more. We're eating lunch more. So it's kind of been an asset to our marriage. And then this is really stupid, but I used to eat out a ton. Like I was a big fast and like chains, not independent places. So, and we've just been eating at home a lot more. So I feel like I'm healthier than I was, if that makes sense. I'm eating apples and celery. Very strange for me. That was a joke. Um,
I like it.
and then just like exercise and things like that. So I don't know if Megan and I have just been really tired, but I think being cooped up at home and doing like having the physical outdoor activities kind of, scheduled in, it's been good for us at least.
That's good. That's good to hear. It's a good report. When you, I started this podcast for a few reasons.
Wait, Rudy, how are you doing? Are you allowed to talk about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can ask me.
I mean, because I know your wife is in the medical field.
She is. She's a physical therapist, works at the trauma hospital in northern Colorado. So, just on the average day, they see all the big cases from western Nebraska, southern Wyoming, and all of northern Colorado, including the mountain towns. And so Estes Park and all of those guys come to us. And yeah, so I think just generally speaking, one, I didn't know that. Even I think it was like 6 months after she started working, she told me, oh yeah, that's the trauma hospital. So, all the big car wrecks and all that she sees. But yeah, so far her report has been, it's not, how did she put it? It's not insane, or people are not kind of losing their wits at work. It has been intense, and there are several cases of people at work. Our church actually today, in about 2 hours, is sending the Chipotle to lunch for her department. So there's 25 workers there, and we're hoping to just kind of go this one lunch, to kind of just bless you guys and thank you for your service. So for her particular role, she does a lot of work with surgery, post-op patients, and so they're canceled all elective surgeries. So she's actually in a position where their department's kind of overstaffed temporarily.
Okay.
That could be changing. But yeah, overall, she's super cautious, and she's telling me morale's pretty high. And so there are concerns about some of the lack of personal protective equipment.
Right. Well, and I feel like in this season for a lot of us, we're powerless to do anything. But I try to think of like people like your wife and my friend Adriana. And like that motivates me to stay inside, take it seriously. If I go to the grocery store, like I feel like an idiot, but I wear gloves, and like I'm just trying to. I feel like the best thing I can do for my friends that are in the field is to take it seriously and not be cavalier. So
That's
I feel like your wife's inspiration for that, and I know like Christians, we like to be cavalier sometimes, and can be frustrating, like to see churches still meeting, in the name of Jesus and stuff like that. So I think like as Christians, we need to lead and set a good example and be like, this is serious, guys. Like, we have friends that are immunocompromised, and we have grandparents and all that stuff. So I'm just grateful that your wife is doing that, and so thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate. I'll pass that on to her. I tell her every day that she goes to work, it feels I feel simultaneously concerned or fearful. I have felt anxiety over that, and then also just pride. I'm just really proud of her.
Yeah.
The medical field works so hard to begin with, in my opinion. Right. And her job is physically taxing daily. And now to add the personal protective equipment, the masks and all that. And she explains it. She just says it's so hot. It's so sweaty. It's just hard. I mean, it just makes everything harder, right. And she's happy to do it, but it's just, gosh, it's hard. So, so I tell her, hey, I'm really proud of you. It does feel like we're we're trying to do our part to support them as well. And of course, the rest of society as well. And that's part of it. You mentioned Christians leading. And I think, to me, I think, honestly, I think the way, I don't know if I say this a lot, but I definitely think it a lot. We're people too. Like, it's
Right.
like us Christians shouldn't be walking around like we're floating off the ground and, are not susceptible or not part of this society, though our home is not here. We know that, but gosh, we're here. This is what this is where we live. This is what we do. These are our friends. These are our family members. We're citizens as well. So to me,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I believe like even at the university here, like the UI wants us to help lead. They want their religious workers to be part of the team, and like encouraging our students to not congregate, and that's folly, right? Like going back to that idea, like thinking because you're 21 and invincible, I'm going to hang out with all my friends still. Like that's the sort of folly I was talking about. Like that's where you can be a little bit more like, hey, I know your frontal lobe's not fully developed, but let my frontal lobe do the thinking for you. That's a perfect example, actually, of what I was getting at.
Yeah, that's good. That's timely as well. So I said I started this podcast to, I think, to try to encourage people mostly to go forward in the name of Jesus, to keep going. My dad, you don't know my family very well, but my dad, lived confined to a wheelchair most of my life from childhood until the day he passed. And actually, we're coming up on an anniversary of his passing in about a week, less than a week. Yeah. Anyhow, but that was his phrase to me, and it was his way after he came to know Jesus later in life. He used to say that every time we would part, and so to me, I always took it as, as an encouragement. Okay, go wherever you're going to go do, and how you're going to live, do it in Him and for Him and in His power and His strength. And I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, yeah, how I wanted to have you on because I think when we're together, you encourage me. I feel like we talk about design and graphics and the arts and all of those things just kind of feed my spirit and my mind and my heart. You've sat with me and warned me. You've sat with me and with concern. You've sat with me with your own concerns. We've laughed and had good times. So, yeah, I just thought, what would you say to helping people, just especially maybe in this time, but just generally you've been speaking? How can you help us keep going in the Lord?
That's really that's tough to know, especially in like a season of quarantine, but I think in general, when you share that sentiment your dad has shared before, and it always makes me think of our mutual friend John Draghi. When I was a student, he had this idea that what if every day when you woke up and looked in the mirror, you just asked God, what do you want me to do today? And just try to live your everyday with that very simple question. Another guy, Marcellus Casey, he works in Kansas City I think he's a pastoring now. I'm not totally sure. Great Christian leader. But he would always talk about like, you don't become a righteous man from these grandiose decisions. You become righteous by very small daily decisions. So I think my best advice is like, don't get ahead of yourself, if that makes sense. And just like, I think there is something to living for the day. Jesus talks about that with worry, but I think it's those little questions of like, what do you want me to do right now? When you have like, every day is full of like several little crossroads, like you have a choice to make. And am I going to do the path of righteousness or go down a path of folly? And it's stupid stuff. I think like what I'm trying to do right now is like every time I go to a grocery store, I just try to like look the person in the eye and say thank you for, I don't say this, but thank you for risking your life so I can eat. Like, thank you for stocking the shelves, and just like trying to be kind to people that are working, because so many people at the stores, like those are the people that will lash out at sometimes and snap at. So, and just like being kind to people as you see them in the street and stuff like that. Like if there's an old lady at the grocery store, like give her your cart and go grab another one, you know, sanitize it, but then give it to her. You know? I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but just like, I think the Christian walk is more about the little things, but everyone wants to know about the big things. Like, I got to make this big. It's like, no, usually most of your life is going to be about little decisions you make. And will you make little righteous decisions and then wake up and be like, I've lived a righteous life?
Mm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to me, so back to my dad, him being so sick most of my life and a lot of his adult life, I don't know that many people. I'm sure they do exist, but I don't know them personally where when they wake up in the morning and they're thankful for another day. He was one of those guys that literally was thankful. He was like, whoa, right. Almost like surprised. I made it again, you know? And, right. And so with that kind of intentionality comes a lot of purpose, even though when you saw my dad wheelchair bound and as he aged, couldn't hear or see that well, you know, cataracts and hearing aids were needed and his teeth were falling out. There was physical challenges where like you would go, what's the purpose? You know, it's like your reach is not very far. To your point, those big things were not coming, but the daily moment to moment, he still had 24/7 to do, you know, he still right. had 24 hours a day, just like you and me or anyone else in the world. And so those choices made all the difference, it seems to me, even though the impact may not have been global or what you might have seen, but the daily impact in his own life, I think, seemed to lead to righteous living. So,
yeah. And I always think of like with Jesus and the Apostle Paul, like two examples. Like Jesus lived about 33 years, and we only probably, if you totaled up all the Bible, like all the stories in the Gospels, like we probably get a glimpse of like, I don't even know, maybe a month of his life, if it was like real time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a lot. Like, and so much of, I think, Paul's life, like there's this big chunk of 14 years that passes by and you're like, mm-hmm. Well, what happened there?
Mm-hmm.
But I think like the Bible can sometimes, since it focuses on the big stories, we forget most of these people's lives were probably semi-unexceptional, and they were just living righteously day by day, doing their best. You know, Jesus was God, fully man, so probably a little different, but mm-hmm. he was a carpenter working perfectly with his dad and mm-hmm. Joseph. And so I don't know. I try to remember that, like when I like am like, because I think, I don't know if this is a millennial thing, but I think a lot of us are asking that question. Like, I want to do something amazing with my life. And I think that's good, but it's also good to remember that there is a part of our life that will be, it's okay if it's a little mundane. Like even the great Bible leaders had mundaneness in their lives. And
yeah. So, okay, here's the question then that comes from that, hearing you say that. And I want to just add this. I've said this on the podcast before. My example of that is Moses. For whatever reason, I've just always thought of him.
Yeah.
40 years, you know, out after killing the Egyptian. 40 years, he scrambles. He sits out in the desert. And what is his life? What does his average Monday 6 a.m. with the sunrise look like? Here's my answer: is he probably went to the bathroom, just like you and me after a long night's sleep. But we don't read that.
Nope.
He hiked up his outfit there and goes down out in the woods somewhere. So it's like that's just how it works. I mean, that's the average Monday of Moses for 40 years. Then the burning bush appears and we see craziness happen. But anyways, okay. So what do you do when you combine what you're saying, that daily, just Galatians, walk by the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, kind of daily righteous living? What do you do with all the ambitions? And I just think of you, like, for example, with your podcasts, or some of the dreams and desires you have, or just your creativity, like your even your willingness to help me with some of my projects. It's like, what do you do with that? I mean, how do you give energy? How do you know when, hey, I'm going to go after that podcast and we're going to do 24 episodes and we're going to reignite it even, so anyways, does that make sense? Can you catch a question?
Oh yeah, that's really a great question. I think this is like, for creatives, I think this is super applicable, because I think, like, with art and cinema and books, like, you're always getting the end product. And if you have the gumption to watch the behind the scenes, you get a little hour and a half glimpse. But these things usually take hours upon hours upon hours. Like, for me to make an hour podcast, it takes like probably 5 hours, for one episode.
Mm-hmm.
And then, recording and technical difficulties and yada, yada, yada. So I think to do anything, you have to do something little faithfully every day to get to the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what author this was, but very prolific writer said, and if anyone knows, tweet me and Rudy the answer, but they would write every day, no matter what. They would just write. And I'll come across creative people that have these ambitions and want to do something, and honestly, they're just a little lazy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, in my mind, I'm like, well, you want to be creative, but you're not putting out any content. Like, so I think if you want to have a great podcast, you have to make lots of really bad podcasts. If you want to make great paintings, you have to make a lot of really bad paintings. If you want to make a great movie, unless you're Damien Chazelle, like, your first movie is going to suck, right? Mm-hmm. But all those people, they're faithful every day to the little stuff, and then it comes together and creates this beautiful project at the end. So
yeah,
with us starting that podcast, I had to be faithful to scheduling a time to record, faithful to editing, faithful to getting the episodes out. And really, I think that was the biggest struggle, was when you don't have an audience, it's hard to feel motivated to put in the work, because I would just be like, why am I doing this? But and I think that's the biggest thing, is like, when you don't have that audience yet, you really have to do it for yourself, in a way, like that there's a pleasure that you derive just from the process.
Yeah.
Because I listen to a lot of interviews with creative practitioners, usually famous people, and over and over again, the thing that I hear is they had to move to a location where they would be around the scene more. And then 2, they just had to grind for a long time. And then they got their break, Most people aren't patient enough and don't want to do the day-to-day faithful thing till you get your break, till you get your burning bush moment. Like, because you will have that moment. You will have a burning bush moment. But if you're not faithful day to day, it might not never happen.
Yeah, that's so well put. I don't know, because I think about that idea probably for the last 20 years, and I don't know if I've heard it so easily and well put as that. And you know, I don't know. I've wondered, because I am one of those people that wants to do great things and I want to see things happen. And even I would say, dare I say, I think God's given me a lot of that. And that's the point, part of the point of this podcast is like, okay, I'm an encourager, exhorter by God's gifting. I've been blessed to be around amazing people for a long period of time. Um, and that's just been the life I've lived for whatever reason. That's what God's given me. And
Right.
so for me, I'm like, oh, I want to hear y'all's stories. I want to hear what you're up to. I want to hear how you do it. How do you go every day? How do you keep going after Jesus? Because I think in your life, those day-to-day moments and even the big moments, my guess is there's something there that can help and inspire and encourage others. I know it encourages me. You know, people ask me all the time, like, what keeps you going? I think you answered earlier, the alumni, and I would say, yeah, my network and family and friends and believers that I know over time that just keep going. They haven't given up. They haven't turned their back on God. They haven't walked away. They're continuing to plug in through thick and thin and sin and corruption and problems and sickness and, you know, whatever. And that
Yeah.
keeps me going. I'm like, man, the fact that Russ is still going in Urbana is awesome. That
Yeah.
keeps me going.
Yeah. And I think like, um, I just want to give people permission to like experiment. And I think it's important to know, like, me and two friends, like we tried this film podcast. We recorded
What's the
24
name of it?
episodes.
What's the name of it? So the
Well,
listeners, we'll link to the show notes.
okay, we're on hiatus right now, so there's no new episodes,
It's
but
okay. You can catch up. Yeah.
Film Lovers Podcast.
There you go. Film Lovers Podcast. And you can find it anywhere.
Yep. Well, iTunes, Spotify, and I think Google. I'm not sure. Google's always changing, so I'm not sure. But Android, I say use Spotify. Apple, use podcasts.
Great.
But I would have never learned this if we didn't try. But we did 24 episodes, and I was really happy to finally. I'd been wanting to try podcasts for like 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
We did it over 2 years, and I got to learn a lot of things about kind of what I'm interested in, what I want a podcast to be like. And where I'm at now is topically, I don't know if I just want to be focused on movies. Like, so I'm starting to think and dream like, okay, do I want to do a podcast that maybe is a little more multi-topic or a different format or something I can do by myself? So I would have never had those thoughts if I hadn't tried it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like if you try something, it might not go gangbusters. Like I think we probably have like 50 devoted listeners, maybe, if I'm being generous,
Mm-hmm.
which is, not bad for independent dudes.
Mm-hmm.
But we weren't doing it just to have an audience. I was doing it because I wanted to learn about podcasting and I wanted to see what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that this podcast will help whatever's next. So I love working in different medium, whether it's like painting, writing, audio recording, music. Like I feel like I just want to keep dabbling, and then the things I keep coming back to are the things that will kind of reveal themselves to be my true passion. So like I don't paint much right now, but I've been doing other creative work, so I feel like sermons have been a real great creative outlet where I can try to be creative with that medium. Like the spoken word is my acrylic paint right now. And like, okay, how can I be abstract and be a little more creative with sermons as opposed to intro 3 points application, So it's not just like artsy fartsy stuff. Like you can be creative in any field, I think.
So I can hear the objections from loved ones I know who I almost hate even just going here.
Let's do it.
But I feel like I need to go here for the sake of the objectors, at least from one man's perspective, your perspective. You just said there for you started by saying for the creatives, and it kind of felt like you ended by saying we're all creative. You can be creative with anything. If that's a spectrum, because I hear the objectors going, I'm not creative. What do you say to that, Mr. Film Lover, podcaster, artist, writer?
This was actually a big soapbox for me in college. I always had this idea that I wanted to write a book called You're an Artist and You Didn't Even Know It. I'll Show You How in 10 Easy Steps. Something like that.
Sounds like a businessman.
Yeah, no, yeah, totally. And the hard part for your question is it would depend on the field. So I would have depending on what that person was into, I feel like you have to approach each non-creative field differently, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if the word creative is a stumbling block, I would just try to find something in their jargon that captures the essence of what the word creative means. So I think a lot of it is contextualizing creativity to that person if they want to. I don't feel a huge need to force someone to believe they're creative. I just know it in my heart. I just think it's part of our Imago Dei. Everyone is generating some form of output, even if it's video games. Just playing a video game, you're generating stats and you're generating time invested. You might not feel this is very creative, but you're doing a lot of creating in that. That might not be a great example. I always think of accountants, but I feel like that's very creative. And the best accountants are probably the ones that think outside the box and think more creatively. Yeah. The best investors are going to be the ones that can approach the market creatively and think. So I don't know. I just feel like I think when people think creative, they think arts and crafts. And I think, at least as a designer, the world is just full of design problems. So maybe I wouldn't use the word creative. I might try to pivot to the word design. Or I just wouldn't use any artsy terms, and just talk about thinking abstractly, thinking outside the box. Corporate people love that phrase, think outside the box. That's just saying think creatively. Mm-hmm. Think abstractly. Because I think creativity is closely tied to abstraction, and abstraction makes a large part of kind of American society uncomfortable. People don't want to think abstract. They want to think plain, easy, linear, empirical, So I think it's just kind of being okay with that, I guess.
One of the things I love about our conversations, Russ, and it's coming out here in the last couple of minutes for me, more so than even the rest of our conversation today. But I for those of you that know Russ, my guess is you'll agree with this sentiment. And for those of you that do not know Russ, you should get to know him. But I think it's this combination of the abstract where you can look at things and it's the designer, or it's your training, or it's your education, or it's just in you, where you almost like if you have something vertical and you just tilt it 10 degrees, 1 degree, you're good at that. You're able to like turn it sideways a little bit and say, oh, that's where the magic is in this. Here it was okay. Here is where it's magical. But you do that with great intellect as well. So there's this intuitiveness that you have on ideas, but then you've got like, again, I don't know if it's the great U of I training, that Harvard of Urbana, or or if it's just the mind God's given you, or you were meant to be a surgeon. I don't know what but like you've got this ability to take this intuitive kind of gut side of things and then match it with just great intellect and good insight. And even going back to the earlier question where you said, man, you've made a lot of mistakes. And so that's kind of almost the gut. Like my gut tells me don't go with my gut anymore. Like,
right. Right.
And so let my mind win out here and trust God, and
Right.
anyhow, I just really love that about you. I love when I'm with you, I feel like I get all of that. I get challenged. I often don't feel as intellectual. Like I'm with you, and I'm like a lot older than you, and I'm like, man, I just learned a lot from you in the way you think. Yeah,
That's very
but
humbling
I love that.
to hear.
I just love that combo. I love it. It's so powerful.
I don't know why I am the way I am, but I will say, like in college, I did study painting and graphic design. So like I don't know. I think like there's just a part of me that like once I love navel gazing, but then eventually I'm like, okay, we got to come up with a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I feel like I'm always looking for like an application for the audience. Like I would just encourage people, like the thing you're not prone to, like try to push into that. Like if you're more creative, push into being more administrative. If you're more administrative, push into being more abstract, like I think you owe it to yourself to try to push yourself. And the best thing I ever learned at U of I was at a job, actually not in school. And this old designer told me, he was my boss, he said, be a student of learning. Don't be a student of a specific topic. Learn how to learn, and you will be set for the rest of your life. And I think like I just wish everyone would think like that, because I think it would just be such an asset to people. So
okay, now I have this question for you, and I think this is where we're going to end.
Great.
Okay, because I think that was really well put. Obviously, great advice from a mentor, former boss. But again, with the purpose of this podcast is helping anyone, but really Christians, go forward in the name of Jesus, to keep going daily or however long God gives us, really with the belief that when you read Hebrews, the book of Hebrews in the Bible, you see the names, and then you see a chunk of scripture there where there are no names. And
Right.
I don't know a lot of famous people in this world personally, but I know a lot of people that are doing amazing things, and God's
Right.
using them doing
Amen.
great things around the world. And so that's what this podcast is about, is to bring an audience to those stories, and hopefully that encourages people. So here's my question in light of what you just shared. Be a student of learning. Is that the advice?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you learning? And let that be something that we can all take with us. And it may not be the specific thing you're learning, but just the thought that we could be continuing to learn. What are you learning right now?
I don't think this is going to be very unique to the world right now, but I think our church, especially, we're being forced to experiment a lot. And I'm kind of being forced into my values. And because I can say that, like, be a student of learning, but I'm
Yeah.
getting older, and it's
Yeah.
hard to teach an old dog new tricks. But um, this season has been forcing all of us to learn how to do church in a new way. And I'd say what I'm learning is like, be flexible with your plans, and be okay if it doesn't go the way you were expecting. So like, I really had my heart set on us doing our service using Zoom, and like, it just wasn't working out. So we had to pivot some things and make some adjustments that I was apprehensive about, but it ended up being a really beautiful service, and it went much better than I think it would have gone had we done it the way I'd been thinking. So like, I'm learning really fresh and new is just like, be flexible. And I don't know. I just want to like eradicate from my mind, like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I just think that's like a lie from the devil or something. Like, I don't want to live like that. You can't you can teach any dog any trick. They might not do it that well if it's an older dog, but stick with the old dogs. I don't know.
Do you have resources to give us along those lines? Are there people you're listening to that had somebody written a book that says you can teach old dogs? Like, is there anything you're grabbing hold to that says, man, this has been really helpful to even help you lean into your values, to actually believe and live what you say you believe, things like that?
This is probably not what you're gonna be expecting, but like, I look at a guy like Bill Simmons, he's 50, and he had a over 20-year career at ESPN. Basically got fired, and then started a whole new sports media company called The Ringer.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And even today, he's innovating new ideas for his podcast. He's called the Podfather. He's like built a whole podcasting empire. He's 50. He's an old dog, but he's surrounded himself with young people to like push him and keep him up to date. And he's still innovating and experimenting, and he's not getting stuck in his ways, And I think like, he's made a choice to push himself and surround himself with people that'll challenge him, as opposed to people that'll just say yes. And I think like, he's a big inspiration for me in terms of like, when I'm 50, I want to have that same ethos that he has creatively. So I don't know if like, I don't imagine a lot of your listeners will be interested in basketball podcasts, which is what he does a lot of. But
I am. I listen to his.
But it's less about the content and more about his ethos and his. And this is really stupid, but like, I think how the Disney company approaches its theme parks, like, is a big inspiration for me in terms of like, they figured out the balance between like, what parts of the park are sacred and what parts of the park can we innovate and expand. And I think like, that's something I try to apply to ministry a lot, is what things should we not change? Communion, preaching the Bible, singing. But what are some things we can adapt? Gospel contextualization, metaphors, analogies. I probably shouldn't be talking about Braveheart anymore, because no one has seen that movie.
Yeah.
So
I'll be there to listen. I'll be there front row to listen.
Those aren't books. That's not like a book or an author, but more like conceptual approaches that I think have been really influential on me the past year.
So it's part of the reason why I do this podcast. I mean, I've told you there's lots of reasons, but one of them is, again, I've been given in all these relationships by God's grace. And if people are willing to sit with me for about an hour and talk to me, I feel like I pick up things from you guys on how to not only just keep going and go forward in the name of Jesus, but also little tips and ideas for my life. And so
Yeah.
I love that. I love that that phrase from your boss. And then I love how you've taken it to Bill Simmons. And I'm 46 and I'll be 47 this year. And so I'm not 50, but I'm getting there. And then, I want to be Bill Simmons too. That sounds great.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing about you, Rudy? I think I just want to encourage people that I think something that you do that a lot of people don't do is you speak your mind in terms of like encouraging people, and you say it to their face. So like a lot of times when we have encouraging thoughts, we'll tell someone's spouse or their friend, So like a lot of times people will compliment me via Megan. So they'll tell Megan the compliment and they won't tell me, they'll tell her. But you always compliment me to my face. And I think like that's a real huge gift. And I just want to encourage people, like, be like Rudy. And if you think of an encouraging word, just say it to that person's face. Like, we all need encouragement. And a lot of us are thinking encouraging thoughts. We're just being bashful, And I love that you're not shy about saying kind things to people. So be like Rudy, everyone. Rudy.
Okay, that's enough of that. Thanks though, brother. I want to pray for you and you and Megan, and then we'll be done here. But thanks for giving all your thoughts there. And to me, I'm leaving wanting more. So I think if you're willing to, we'll do this again. So
yeah, let me know.
Yeah. Let's pray.
Right.
Father,
love you, bro.
Love you too. Let me pray.
Well, thanks, Russ. Thanks for the interview and the time that you gave me. We normally get to see each other around this time of the year at a conference we both attend, but this year we were not able to, of course, with travel restrictions. But it was good to catch up here on the podcast. So thanks for serving in that way. And to all of you listeners, thanks for catching up with me today. It's really a joy and a pleasure to bring you these interviews. They really bless my heart, and I hope that they do the same for you. Now, everybody with COVID-19, as we're still battling this around the world, I just want to let you know I'm praying regularly for the world and for you, the listeners, just praying for everyone that I know and anybody that can come to mind. And so I want to encourage you to keep praying. Let's ask God to stop this virus and to have mercy on our world. So until I bring you the next podcast, or until we talk in some other way, I just want to encourage you to go forward in the name of Jesus. And thanks for listening.